Yes, the button has been pressed,
I had a warning this time.
and we are live.
I had multiple warnings because I had a warning last time too. Hi, Rick.
Hi,
Good to see
Fati.
you.
Hey, good to see you. Good to see you. Uh, how I know we always start our conversations before this ever comes on, but I never did catch up and hear about your week. Like, how was your week?
Very eventful.
Eventful. Well, that's
Very eventful.
yeah,
Half of which was taken up by my daughter's birthday.
right. Yes.
I think she thinks that she's royalty or something. Like the guest list was terribly long, and many things happened,
Yeah.
including having to change the day, time, and place last minute to a
Oh,
day early.
and make it a day early.
Make it a day early with
Oh,
maybe like 10-hour notice to people.
right, right. Wow, wow.
Yeah, yeah, it was eventful.
I that would cause me a little bit of angst or a little bit of pressure, a little.
Just a little bit, just a little bit. I mean, it turned out to be a huge success, and only one family couldn't make it. But I was like, wow, how did I pull this one off? Yeah, relying on the weather is can be a little unpredictable. So,
Oh yes, oh yes. We had an unseasonal windstorm on Monday, and of course I had a lot of things lined up in the morning, and yeah, the power blew out because when it gets really windy here, there's usually a tree or two because I live in a forest, and
it's so
none of the
nice.
trees are planted or in ground too deep because it's a kind of a rainforest. They don't have to go deep for moisture, right? Um, yeah, so we had some fairly 50, 60 miles an hour in your understandable language,
Okay.
which is about 100 plus kilometers an hour here, gusts kind of a thing. Yeah, yeah, it
Wow.
made for an interesting morning, but you know what, it's much like maybe what you experienced, but it's sort of like, oh well, I mean, there's not much I can do about it, right? Just let's just see what else I can come up with. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Breathe deeply, turn the rainbow themed birthday party into a rainbow and unicorns. That's it.
Well,
That's what I had
of
to
course, of course.
do. Recycle decorations from last year and make it
Oh, perfect.
happen.
Oh, perfect. Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah. I was like, well, it won't just be rainbows this year. It's going to be
Yeah.
rainbows and unicorns. And she's like, why? I'm like, do you want a birthday party in the rain or in the sun? In the sun. So it's going to be unicorns too.
It's just amazing how adaptable, and I bet you during the actual event itself, there was no ever any more thought
Oh,
about
yeah.
anything.
No
Yeah,
one really thought about it. Yeah.
no, just have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, no, this is so we came up with this theme because I think we were both going through some periods and things like that, and it's funny again, how in sync we can be, even
Mhm.
though that we're so far apart from each other, and we rarely talk during the week in the sense of just quick texts and things like that. But it always amazes me when something brews up here, how it tends to somehow brew in other people that you're kind of connected. Oh, I was thinking about the same thing, or that's exactly what I'm going through right now, kind of thing. So
Mhm.
it's it always fascinates me that way, you know. And it's much like when I get a name in my head, it's like, oh geez, I haven't heard from that person for a while. I'm going to give them a phone call, or I'm going to text them, and they would often say, it's like, wow, that was timely, you know. So
Or I
it's
was just thinking about you. right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens so often, and that's that's the that energy exchange that we can't really see and touch, but that's there, right? We
Yeah.
have evidence of that in our everyday life. That telepathic communication, how the information just does, call it intuition, call it, like information in the quantum field, call it what you want,
Yeah.
but there is a way of communication or receiving information or messages that's not spoken, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That we all experience.
Yeah. Because I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about it, language in itself is, in the whole scheme of how long we've been around, language
Hmm.
is there wasn't a lot of speaking going on, way back when, kind of a thing, and they somehow
Yeah.
had to communicate somewhere. So maybe there is something to that, and maybe we'll have to do another. Maybe we should do a show just in silence.
And see what would happen and who would show up. I don't
See,
know. It would be a little awkward
you know,
for everyone.
yeah, we'd both be like mentalists, right? It's like, what do you mean you can't read my thoughts?
Might take a little practice.
It just might. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Oh, good laugh. Good laugh.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think what you were referencing as us as being in sync was when you asked me if I would have liked to talk about this subject today. And my response to you was actually, I don't know if it was the same day or if it was the day before. I was like, my husband's death anniversary is tomorrow or like today or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fitting because it's something that I am in some ways re-experiencing right now, obviously not with the same intensity as when it happened. It's been 15 years. This was 15 years.
Mm,
Um, but no matter what, even if I'm not consciously thinking about the date, there's something in me that shifts around this date, right? There's like a memory within my body or
okay.
somewhere in there that knows if that's happening. So this year, the way I became aware of it was I just all of a sudden felt really upset during a yoga class, like really,
Oh,
really, really sad. And I
yeah.
had this like just image of him that came randomly out of nowhere. And I was like, what was that at first, right? What is happening to me? And then I realized, oh, wow, in 3 days,
Mm,
it's his anniversary. I think it was actually, it was maybe 2 days before. And yeah, it was like inevitably every year, something within me reminds me of it, even if I'm not really thinking about it.
yeah. You're not consciously aware of it,
I'm
right?
not, yeah, I'm not consciously aware of it, but I start feeling it. I mean, I would say in the first years was a lot more dominant.
Yeah.
It's not as intense as it was then, but yeah, nonetheless, the memory is there for sure, and it's kind of there's some conflict there for me because my daughter was born the day after, so it's
Oh,
yeah, there's a lot there, right? There's a
yeah.
lot of symbolism and these really contrasting feelings for me. Like the
Yeah.
day that she was born was one of the most beautiful days of my life, maybe a little painful too.
Yeah.
But like that day is a day that I celebrate, right? But the day before is the day that he passed away, and I always think of her as that rainbow that came after the storm, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Adina. So yeah, that conflict is there. In the feelings, it's kind of interesting how these like the sadness and the happiness can be there at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that's how I experienced it this year. I always say grief is something that we will always carry with us.
Yeah.
It's just the intensity of it changes, the way we process it, obviously.
Yeah.
And but we're always going to miss the person that we loved that is no longer here.
And that's and I started really like this all stemmed for me from some news about the passing of a paramedic that was up near here, and I knew her. Um, of course, not being in the work and being involved in that, you kind of lose touch of a lot of different people.
Mm-hmm.
So when you find out who it is and various other things, and that whole community was in quite shock over it. And I started sort of thinking about the word loss,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the common phrases, I mean, including like what Adina pointed out, and don't get me, like, there's nothing wrong with what I'm saying. Like, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
it's just an observation. I'm not making any value statement on anything, but I'm always curious about what did we really lose. Like, we'll say, oh, we lost a coworker, or we lost, like, and and I started a blog article, and I sort of got lost in it, in the sense of, um, I was drifting a lot. I wasn't as
Mm-hmm.
focused, which I thought was kind of weird. So in other words, I'm still exploring what is it that we lost, um,
Mm-hmm.
because when it comes to the memory, um, like, I have family members that have passed away several years ago, and they've always lived in distances, like they've lived away, right? And there are times when I really think they're still there, like
Mm-hmm.
they never left. And then somebody reminds me of, well, they passed away, or I remind myself. So there is a lot of to be said about the memory of that still lives, so what we might have lost the opportunity of being with somebody in a physical realm, but we haven't lost the opportunity to stop loving them. And I think that's part of what grieving um, is that it's that expression of love.
Yeah, it's impossible to stop loving someone
Yeah.
just because they're gone, right? Like, and I think that's also what makes it really complicated,
Yes.
because when you love someone, you want to see them and spend time with them. And the idea of never being able to do that in this physical form is very difficult to grasp,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think it's just loss overall is complicated. Obviously, it's also very different depending on who you lose, right? What relationship you had with this
Yes.
person, how
Yeah.
much were they a part of your life, right? I lost my dad when I was 8, and I lost my husband when I was 30, and they were very different losses in that sense, right?
Mhm.
They affected me in a very different way. I was a different age, right? And also, what age are you at? Where are you at in your life, right?
Mhm.
What kind of level of acceptance do you have with death, right? As a kid, I didn't really understand death, right? I
No.
wasn't old enough to truly grasp what it meant. So when my dad died, that was super complicated for me to accept, because I just didn't really understand where he went, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And when my husband died, I knew that I would never see him again, because my dad had died so many years before, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was a lot of that experience that came back to affect the way I experienced my husband's death, because there was so much that was unprocessed around my dad's death. And it was almost like I had to process them both at the same time, but not really being able to fully process definitely my dad's, right? But really having to um, remind myself that there were two separate things at some time, at some point, and but also, like, there was a lot that I carried into it in terms of because I already knew what it meant, right? So I already knew I would be missing him. I already knew that some of the memories would fade, and I knew that things would start getting fuzzier as time went by. And
Mm-hmm.
that for me was one of the most difficult parts, like this feeling that things were not going to be as clear as they were in that moment
Right.
when he departed.
Right.
Um, Yeah, so it's just so and I think what is also complicated aside from how you experience it, right, which is so subjective and so connected to your own life
Very.
experience,
It's
is
personal.
also
Yeah. Very
very
personal.
personal,
Very
very
personal. Yeah.
personal.
Yeah.
I think what's also really, really makes it really challenging is how everyone around you reacts to that death and responds to you, right? In my case, with my husband, because I was his wife, I had a lot of attention on me, and I felt like I just needed space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I had a lot of attention and a lot of people that were looking at me that wanted to reach out and wanted to say the right things. And it almost wasn't a single thing anyone could say that made me feel better. It actually really triggered me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always very careful around people when they lose someone. I think grief is super complicated. I think it's trying to fix it is definitely the wrong thing to do because
No.
there's no fixing it, right?
Well, and I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because that is something that we're never really taught. It's something that
Mm-hmm.
we, in some ways, intuitively respond to it, but also we get trapped in there is a right way of doing it. And we're looking
Mm-hmm.
for those right because we see somebody that is suffering, and I don't know too many people in my experience that that don't want people to suffer. Like, like when we see
Mm-hmm.
people that are suffering, I know I don't want that. I want them to um, you know, get better wherever, whatever adjective you want. And so there's a bit of a tendency to try and heal or to try and do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Part of that, and this is my observation for me personally, is because I'm uncomfortable.
No, that's 100. That's not part of it. That's. I mean, it is part of it, but I think
Yeah,
that's a big.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the reason. Like
yeah,
you're so uncomfortable because
yeah.
you don't know what to say, and it's uncomfortable to sit with it in silence, and you feel like you need to say something.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and really, the only thing you can say is acknowledge the person's pain. This must be really
Well,
hard for you,
and
you
and and
know?
and allow them to have whatever experience,
Yeah.
however that grief shows up. It's okay, right? And I heard this phrase from an author, Mavis Karn, who says what most people need is a good listening,
Hmm.
right? They just need somebody to listen. If that's the kind of
Hmm.
support they need. Like, to me, it's not how can I help you during this time? What can I do to support you in this time?
Hmm.
And if that's, if it looks like I just want to be left alone, or if I just want you to listen while I do whatever, right? Then fine, right? Because there really is nothing to fix.
There's nothing to fix other than process the pain because
Yeah,
it's very painful,
yeah.
very, very
It's
painful.
and
And
it's a natural process,
it's
right?
natural.
Yeah.
But there's nothing like it. There's nothing feels like that I have
No,
experienced in my
no,
life.
no.
And it's a process that cannot be rushed. It's a process that has
Another
to
good
run its
point.
course. Yeah.
Yeah. There is no time
Yeah.
limit on grief.
There's
Like,
no tools, there's no like shortcuts. There's absolutely not. I mean, I would say that the shortcut would be to feel the feelings, to be sad, to cry, to
to allow
scream,
the expressions. Yeah,
to
exactly.
allow it to
Yeah.
express. Yeah, and also kind of give yourself breaks in that, because it can be all consuming too.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. No, and that's because there's well, as you can see on the back here, there's a book that came out, and I forget, it was Elizabeth Gubler 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 Ross, who came up with the five stages of grieving, right?
mhm.
And and my understanding of it is it does not necessarily mean that you have to go in a particular order, and it also doesn't mean that you have to go through all five of them. What my understanding is that throughout that process, some of these will show up. You'll have that kind of expression of grief, either, and you kind of mentioned it a couple of times in yours about the acceptance piece, right?
It took a long time for me, the acceptance piece, but definitely went through the denial. I would say more than denial is sometimes disbelief, depending on how the person has died, right?
Yeah,
There's always a moment of shock. I mean, I watched him die, so I had proof that he had died, but there
yeah,
was still this like um, waking up and not believing my reality,
yeah.
just waking up and not wishing that I didn't wake up to the reality that I woke up to. Definitely anger. I don't know what bargaining would mean. Do you know what she
Bargaining
refers to?
bargaining happens, um, to sort of in the beginning. It's almost like you're bargaining with God, like take me instead of them, something along
Yeah,
those lines,
yeah.
right? You're going into that kind of a
There's
mode.
some guilt there too. I
Totally.
remember feeling guilty that I was
Yeah,
still here and he wasn't there anymore.
yeah,
Definitely depression, and and that one lasted a long time for
yeah,
me, and the anger lasted a long time too.
yeah.
Um,
And
but
and
yeah,
and like we're not really big fans of labels, but we're also, each one of those, if you find yourself in that particular stage, right, there's no time limit within those stages. Like there's nothing that says, oh, if you're not angry or going through that over a period of time, or if you're in it too long of a period of time, there's something wrong, kind of a thing, right?
hmm,
you know like everybody experiences it differently, right? There might be some
yeah,
similarities, right? But my mother, when
uh,
she passed away, I'm almost certain, between my siblings and my kids, and even including my wife, processed that whole thing differently. Even my dad, right?
yeah,
And there was a tendency at that time that my dad was very stoic, very stoic. And people were always encouraging him to, if you're going to cry, cry, right? And it was really hard for him, like, because culturally he looked at that as a sign of weakness. So,
hmm,
so he had that over top of the emotion. And every once in a while I'll catch him, being in a sad state, kind of a thing. But what I do differently about that is I don't say should. I say
hmm,
you should just let that go more, right? It's like,
hmm,
I'm here, Dad, you're sad. Just anything you want, that's fine, right? So there's a lot I have learned in myself, and then part of that thing is when I get trapped in sort of like techniques, or it should show up this way. No, I have no right to tell that person it should show up this way. That's
hmm,
just me.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I I do think that sometimes people around you complicate it for you, because, like we said,
Yeah.
there's this well, first of all, people are faced with their own mortality too. They're reminded of their own mortality, and that
Oh,
makes everyone really uncomfortable, right?
yeah.
So that's one massive piece of discomfort that touches us all, right,
Yeah.
on a deep level. And then there's the discomfort of not knowing what to say or how to fix it. But I think that in my experience, I literally like lost friendships over it because
Mm,
people just could not look at me and not think of him, could not, things were not the same anymore, right? And
right.
so a lot of friendships faded away over it because it was just too painful and too difficult to um, face the changed reality, you know.
Yeah.
And some people just can deal with any of it, with watching you go through the pain, with how it has changed things around them, or the fact that they can't do anything about it or help you in any way, and so they just drift away. And I think that's an important thing to speak to
Okay.
because it feels very wrong, right? I mean, not only I just lost someone really close to me, now people around me are either not calling me anymore or not able to accept where I'm at, or pushing me to accept something I'm not ready to accept, giving me unsolicited advice.
Mm-hmm.
It gets complicated. It really gets, I think once the shock, those first couple of phases, the shock goes away and it starts settling in, and you somewhat go back to, you don't go back to normal for a
Oh,
long time.
no.
Again, depends on who it was. For me, it was my husband. So it
Yeah.
affected every minute of my day. Um, but like once things go back to this semi-normal, that's when you realize, you start paying attention to other things, and you realize the changed behaviors, people that stop calling you or frankly avoiding you. I literally notice people avoiding me. And then there's the other side of the coin. There are those people that you would never expect them to be there for you, that show up and
Mm-hmm.
they feel really good and they can listen. Or, in my case, I went to bereavement groups, and I have to say it was very awkward at first because I was the youngest person in that
Mm-hmm.
group. It was specific to losing your spouse. Everyone in there was double my age. And when I walked in, I think they were taken back at first, and then we all started like talking, and I think I became, everyone just was so caring for me, because they felt like I had gotten cheated the time that they had with their spouse, and
Mm-hmm.
we all realized that no matter what our age differences were, we all felt exactly the same way. Like the nature of the loss was so great for all of us, and we had
Yeah.
this really, really deep connection with each other because we were going through something
Mm.
remarkably difficult in that moment. And that was like a really great bond that was formed in these groups. It was very healing. So
I,
that is something I always recommend people do.
well, it's that I don't know how to put it, but anytime you're in a group of with a shared experience, right? There's a synergy that's
Mm-hmm.
developed,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like anything, like even even in work. I mean, I know this is a sort of on the other side of the extreme, but when you're involved in a project where you have a common mission and common visions around things, there's that same sort of energy and synergy that happens with that. You're seeing that in Ukraine right now, right? You're seeing how
Mm-hmm.
groups of people are bonding together because there's a shared experience going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's solace in that. There's
Mm-hmm.
comfort in that. The words of "Me Too,"
Mm-hmm.
are very comforting.
I find it to be very, very powerful. And I feel like I found a place where I felt heard and understood, and I could
Mm,
openly just show my pain and speak about it,
yeah,
and they could take it, they could listen to it. Because
right.
what part of what, people around me that couldn't deal with it were doing, that they just couldn't take what I had to say. They just couldn't listen to it anymore because I was obsessive too. To be honest, I was talking about it all the time. because everything reminded me of this loss,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah, yeah.
everything I did was like I was reminded that he wasn't there with me. So it was very hard for me to navigate the world for a while.
Oh,
And but then, when I found this group, it was very, very healing. It was surprising. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, how much I was looking forward to going there. Obviously, there were sad conversations, but also seeing other people go through it, you get that observer's perspective.
hmm.
Um, that was helpful too, because I could see how stuck they may have been in that moment, and then they reminded me of me, and so I started realizing where I was at with it.
And it's a very now I've been in debriefing groups, but not in what you've experienced. But I have a sense of it's a very present moment, even though
Hmm.
you're talking about things that might have happened in the past and things like that. It's a very present moment, and I know personally, like particularly with depression, you're caught up in the content of your thinking, and when you're lost in that, there is a feeling of aloneness, like you are totally separated from anything else. um,
Hmm.
but when what you've experienced in that group is being back sort of away from letting go of what's going on and being part of the conversation, and you're feeling more attached and grounded.
Yeah, and it was also very specific to people who had lost their spouses to cancer,
Mm,
because that also adds a whole other layer.
yes, because
The other thing that
it wasn't sudden for you, was it? Like,
no, it wasn't sudden, and it was very specific to the illness, and I think when you go through something like that with someone you love, you don't have time to process it until after they're gone. So there was a lot of the illness trauma around the illness part of it that I hadn't processed, that I was able to process with them, and through these meetings. And obviously I had an individual therapist too. Like I had a lot of support at some point,
yeah, yeah.
because yeah, I just couldn't get out of it on my own. It was just too deep, and like I said, for me it was definitely amplified by the loss of my dad as a kid, and not having processed it fully in the way I should have, because the circumstances around my dad's death were very different. There was no proof of him being, killed for a long time. So it was complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then so when that happened, it was just really, really amplified for me.
Yeah, yeah. No, it shows up in so many different ways, doesn't it? And under different
Mhm.
circumstances, right? And um, loss of a child, loss of, you know, I mean, even yeah,
I mean, your parents, your spouse, and your children, right? I mean, it doesn't get any closer than that. Yeah, it doesn't get any closer than that.
no,
And but it's part of life, right? It's
it
part of
is.
life.
It is, and it's something. It's something. Like we we celebrate the birth,
Hmm.
right? And eh, you know, and my first experience of death was my grandfather, and Catholics do things differently. It's like, and um, I ended up passing out because the ceremony was like there was so much going on in the ceremony, and
Hmm.
the incense that they were burning and all this other kind of stuff, and um, but it was a really like I can understand a little bit of what you were saying. Like I could not really process. It was an open casket. I
Hmm.
think I was like only 13, 12 years old or something like that. I was part of the pallbearers, kind of a thing. Um, and it's like it still didn't really sink in.
Hmm.
Um, but I tell you, there was regrets as I got older, not
Mm,
not taking the opportunity to really get closer, but I was
mm,
a kid, right? I was a kid. I didn't know, right?
mhm,
Um, and I find there was one particular death that kind of hit me hard. One was when I lost an actual colleague in in an accident they had um, um, in the line of duty, and I was responsible for the ceremony and the funeral and the arrangements, and I was really really caught up in the arrangements and the process of it, and didn't have time to do my own grieving until until it was all over. And and when I realized it was all over, it was like I don't have anything else to do now. I had nothing to keep me busy, and felt this
mhm.
emptiness, and that
Yeah.
emptiness filled up with grief and regret and
Yeah.
anger, and everything was mixed into there. It was like, you know,
Mhm.
and there was something, and I say this, innocently, because I think people are always doing the best they can given the level of their understanding. Because I held a leadership role, um, I the support I got was really weird. It was really different. It was almost like hands off. Like he's in a leadership role. He can handle it.
Mm.
And
That's
it's really like,
interesting.
wait a minute. Um, and I really felt alone. I really felt,
Mhm.
disconnected. And then that disconnected turned into anger and resentment and various other things. But yeah, no, we it shows up so many different ways. But it's something
So
that
many different ways.
we definitely do not honor or really truly understand. And I think that's where part of our trouble comes in, is because we haven't really settled it our own mortality. Um,
Yeah. But it's also it's also not something you can practice, thankfully.
no, no, you can't.
I mean, you can over the years, and it's unique to who you lose.
Well,
So there's no pinning this one down other than understanding your own relationship with death and how you feel about it, right? Which I would say for me, with both those deaths, I did not have a good spiritual sense of what was going to happen. It was
mm,
not something that I could ever really look at,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
only in recent years that I have come into my own spiritual beliefs
yeah.
that I feel they would help me, right? If I, you know, I'll, why not have to face that again?
Hmm.
It's even difficult for me to say that, right? Because I'm like, I kind of don't want to say this, but right. Um, so it's there's not much that you can do about it other than really understanding where you stand with what that means for you, right? And when the time will come, you'll deal with it the best that you can with the tools that you have in that moment, right?
and and that's really important too. I like what you said about that, because there's depending, of course, sudden death is different. What you experienced is sort of like, like you kind of knew, but even then it's something that feels like you could never really prepare for it. um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
but I lost my train of thought on that. Did you see that train just go by? Because it had a thought on it, and I kind of missed it.
Is that even possible? I thought they were just like chasing us all day long. These
Oh
thoughts.
god, chasing the
No,
tail.
you were saying that you liked what I just said about the fact that you can just you can have your own spiritual beliefs about it and really come to terms with that, but there's really nothing you can do in terms of preparing for it. You have to deal with it with the tools that you have in that
Yeah,
moment.
that
Yeah,
and and to realize that you do have that innate ability, like
yeah.
that resilience within you, and I find that comforting in myself, knowing that when I look back at all the stuff that I've gone through, right, as much as I probably was pissed off and angry and didn't like it, it still validated how resilient I really am,
Hmm.
and how resilient everybody is. So
Yeah.
even though it feels like you'll never get over it in the moment, like it feels that way, right? It feels like this is going to last forever. When you're reminded and just sort of relax a bit of it, then that true essence does come out, and then you do find
Hmm.
healing, and then you do find, oh, it is not as bad as it was yesterday, and
Mm.
there seems to be a healing going on.
There's a healing going on. There's adapting to a new reality, right? It's a big part of like when it's someone really, really close to you, there's the habitual life that you've had gets ripped away,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
so
a
there
person
really is
gets a
no getting back
no,
to normal.
there is no getting back to normal
No.
because there's no getting the person back, right? And it's one of the most difficult things to accept is that things will never be the same. And the thing that you intellectually understand is that, I will always love the person. I will
Hmm.
always feel that way about the person. But emotionally, it's really hard to just hang on to the love and let go of the pain because you're still processing it, right? Well, of course I love him, right? And there were moments where I would get sad about the fact that every time I thought about him, I would get sad, right? So then I would get angry about it. Like, why am I not able to just feel the happiness when I think about him? And I feel sad because the moment I think about him, I'm reminded that he's not here. And
Hmm.
that took a really long time to change and shift. And still today, like I think about him, there are moments that I can just be laughing and
Yeah.
happy and be with the love, and moments that just I feel a knot. I'm feeling a knot now thinking
Yeah.
about him,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's milder than it was right after he died, obviously, right? It's not as strong, but the sadness is there, and I could certainly get really sad if I focused on the fact that he's not there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think over time you also gain some control over how you feel about it and when it hits you. Not always, but you can choose to shift your thinking. But at the beginning, that was very difficult for me. It was almost like I had no control over my brain and how often it would go to him. It's trauma, right?
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
processing
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
And it just really keeps us there, right? The
Yeah.
trauma is a rehearsal of,
Yeah. Yeah.
where you
And
have lost a person that you've lost.
and you remind yourself that it is part of the deal. It's part of processing. It's a natural process that we go through. Like, even like, we're always whatever evoking memories, kind of a thing, and that's the gift and the curse of memories,
Mhm.
is that there are things that we could bring up and get warm and fuzzy and feel really good, and there are things that we can bring up that bring sadness or
Mhm.
melancholy or all sorts of different other feelings, right?
Mhm.
But that's what it is. There's nothing that says there's anything wrong with that. Like, when we start
No.
labeling or adding more layers on it, oh, after all these years, I should never feel this way again. No, 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 no. Please give yourself a break. It's like,
Yeah.
right?
So like shortly after John, my husband's name was John. John died. I was with his sister, and with whom I'm still in touch. And we were going through some of his stuff, and I found this poem that he had written.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he had written for me. Became clear it was for me, and one of the lines that just stuck with me was, "Memories cannot be lost, only locked in a box, um, only put in a box locked by self-pride."
Mm,
And I kept like hearing him say it, right? Memories cannot be lost. And because I think he knew he was going to die.
yeah.
Um, and it's true. Memories cannot be lost. They
No.
are locked in a little box
Yeah.
somewhere up in my closet. and in this box right here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it takes time. It takes time to even be able to look at the pictures and not get sad. Go through their stuff. It's a process that absolutely cannot be rushed.
No, and not to be afraid of either,
Mhm.
right? Not to be afraid of. Like I've often said to my dad, my dad made a bunch of movie films like in the old days. Like he
Mhm.
had a camera. Used to drive my aunts and uncles crazy because he had the big spotlights and they were bright, and every time we were at a family function, he would have his movie camera out and everybody would be going like this, because it was so bright, right? And it was fun watching them, as they got developed, and we would sit down as a family and bring the projector out and yes, kids, this is before DVD players and VCRs and all those other technology, right? Um, the
Which are old by now.
Yes, yes, which is even older now. Now it's like thumb drive and streaming. Before streaming, we used to have this thing where you put a reel in, but I've often asked him, like I digitized them, quite a few of them, and I said, "Do you ever want to watch them?" And he said, "No." He says, "Really? Like how come?" Makes me too sad. And
Mm.
and I said, "Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's him." But part of me is sort of saying it's sad that you can't be sad,
Mhm.
right? Not to allow yourself to be sad. And so you start doing things to avoid an experience of sadness.
Yeah,
And I think that
100%.
that also could be a bit of a trap. It's like, oh well, I don't want to do this, because it's going to do. I'm never going to go here anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore, kind of thing. So yeah, no, I'm often reminded, the quote from Sid Banks was saying about, if there was one thing that we could learn as humans is to allow our experiences to learn to be comfortable with
Feel
our
it.
experiences.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's like all emotions. This is the ultimate emotion to process. You gotta let them express,
yeah,
and often people just avoid it, right? A lot of people deal with grief by not feeling the grief.
yeah,
Um, that's a coping mechanism, right?
yep,
The king of coping mechanisms, avoidance. Um, it's unhealthy because it comes out in other ways, right? But
yeah,
that's what that
yeah.
person knows
It,
how
it,
to,
it could
right?
show up in so many different ways, right?
Yeah, and I would say that denial phase, that initial phase, it is because the pain is so great that it's very difficult to kind of process to start with. It takes some time to kind of grasp it intellectually, and then you can start really like processing it. But the denial phase, again, like with my dad, makes sense why I was in denial for a while, both my age and how he died, and in fact that I never actually had proof that he had died. But with my husband, I knew he was sick, right? And I was there when he died, and it was still like I was not prepared for it. I
Hmm.
still didn't
No,
expect it, I still couldn't believe it. I was still in shock, and, just there was some denial there too, right?
yep,
So it just really is. the intellect and the emotional piece takes some time to like start sinking back in together around grief. That's always been my experience.
Yeah.
Um,
There's an acronym for fine, and I'm not sure it's what they're coming up with as far as their meaning behind the expression. But when you come up to somebody, and you probably have more experience. Well, even I've had it, and said the same thing. But people come up and they go, how are you doing? And
mhm.
most of the time, I'll say I'm fine. And people have come up with this acronym for fine as being feelings inside not expressed.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
It, and it's a little bit touchy in the sense of, okay, when I'm asking and somebody says that, are they really fine or not fine? And if they're not fine, then is it my place to you know
Point it out.
point that out? I don't, that's a bit of a, because the last thing I would want to do is what you experience is like, oh, like, I don't, as a good, and that's why I think it's not how can I help, it's more what can I support you in.
Hmm.
And I think that to me has been a big flip for me in my approach, is as much as I want to help and ease your pain, I'm really there for support. I'm
Hmm.
really there for whatever you need, whether it's an ear or a lean to or
Yeah. I remember even a simple question like that was triggering to me. I was like, how the hell do
yes,
you think I'm feeling?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
don't ask me that.
Yeah.
It was just
What
literally
could just
like,
happen to me?
how
It's
are
like,
you feeling? Like shit.
and maybe that's
Do
what
I
we
need
should
to say
do.
that to you? Because then you do have this anger inside, right? It's like, I don't feel very well. And, I think we can establish that without asking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We don't have to
Uh,
test the water here.
how
It's
are you holding up? I'm not. I'm a
oh, oh,
wreck.
okay. Well,
Or, or are you dating yet? Like a month later, like, oh my God, I'm like, get out of my sight. Like things that people think that are gonna help you, or like, I'm gonna be your cheerleader. It's okay for you to date again. It's like, it's not okay for me yet.
it's like, well, that's that whole thing. Like everybody, I have an opinion. You have an, like we people
I
have opinions.
mean,
You know,
yeah.
it's like it says in
It's,
Dr. Spock's book. Like you've had enough time now.
I mean, I really think that just acknowledging the pain and giving someone a hug, or just offering to be there in any way they choose for you to be there, it's the only thing that you can say.
Yeah,
Like, I would highly advise staying away from anything that has any resemblance of wanting to fix it or like make the person feel better. The person's not going to feel better. If you telling me, oh, you go ahead and date.
or even that
Like,
toxic positivity thing that we talked
oh,
about in
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, come on, it's time to move on. It's been a month. Yeah, I had a really close friend. Like, we stopped being friends after that because it was so difficult. For he was
yeah,
my neighbor too, so I
yeah,
would see him a lot. And like, come on, it's just time to like put on a smile. Come on,
yeah,
you
yeah.
can do it.
Live
You
your
know,
life. Live your life.
he wouldn't want to see you like this. Like the guilt trip. Now you're guilting me.
Yeah,
You wouldn't want to see you like this. And then, like I said, many people that I did not expect, um, they felt really good to talk to. They knew how to hold a space for me to just talk. They
mm,
really, I'm sure they really didn't say much, or they just showed up. They just showed up to keep me company, or to have a drink with me, or to go for a walk, or they just showed up. And they were not always my closest, but actually I feel that my closest friends were not able to because they were also grieving. They were also grieving in their own way, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, totally.
So
Yeah. Because
yeah.
it's their point of view, right? Yeah.
And I actually think that's a really good point because even within my family, right, we all grieved my dad in a very different way. And grief can really divide people
Yeah.
because it's such a personal experience, and because it shows up so differently for each one of us, it can often be very difficult to grieve with someone that's close to you. It's super complicated, not just because of how we feel about it or the nature of it or the nature of our own mortality, but also because it can really like separate you, feel like isolating in that sense from the people that are closest to you, because it's sometimes you're just reminded of the person that you lost through the people that are still there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really like it's a part of it. It's a part of this difficult process of acceptance and finding a new normal, uh, and accepting that the normal you didn't want to let go of is gone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And yeah, no, there's so many layers there. There's so many layers.
so layered. It's so layered, and I always advise people who, I had someone in my mastermind group who was trying to be there for a friend who lost his wife. And, and I had to speak from a place of here is what I have to offer from my experience. I know that you're trying to help him. Doesn't sound like he's ready for the help.
Yeah.
And all that you can do is just listen and just be there when he needs you. And it becomes on your end a process of acceptance. And it's painful. Sometimes it's painful to just sit there and watch someone suffer. But oftentimes with grief, especially when it's so fresh, that is all you can do.
And that's the learning process, right? That's
Mhm.
learning to be comfortable with your experience of what's going on with the other person, right? Because you're having an uneasy experience because you think there's something you should be doing, but like Mavis Carden says, everybody needs a good listening to,
Mhm.
right? We don't need a good talking to. We need a good
Mhm.
listening to, and just being there for the individual in whatever way we need to show up for them is the best service that we could provide.
And also be like flexible with you. You may have to try different things. Like it didn't always work when someone was trying to distract me. There were moments where I was like resentful of that.
Well, that's what I
That
mean. Like,
you
like
know, so you just shift your. This is really not a strategy. The strategy is
just
really reading the person and like kind of sitting with the person within
and not
the space
everybody
that
wants a
you.
hug either.
Yeah. And not everyone wants a hug either. That's very true. So
I
you
learned
ask
that
for
I learned that
permission.
one. I learned that one. It's like because
Yeah.
I like hugs, and it's like, and it's like, whoops. Oh, it's we just do the best, right? We just do the best.
We do the best that we can. And I would say another thing that works is just really sending love to the person and loving them.
Absolutely.
Sometimes really receiving a hug doesn't feel good, like you said. And all you can do is just really energetically send love towards the person that's suffering.
Yeah.
And, just from time to time checking in. Yeah, don't
That
we have
that
to do the hugging from afar thing often? I feel like I've had
no,
to do that quite a few
and
times
I
lately.
think I think that's a I like that what you just said is the checking in part
Hmm.
is just touching in, and regardless of what the answer is, you're just sending a signal out that, what, I'm here and I'm thinking about you. That's it.
And also not taking it personally if there's no
Very good
response
point.
on the other
Good.
end,
Yeah.
like because there are, even for me who have been through it, and I had one of my closest childhood friends died I think it's been almost 4 years. And I was really trying to be there for her husband from a place of having been through it, as a losing my spouse. And there were moments where I could tell that what I said to him felt healing and it felt good. And there were moments where there was no response, and I really respected it.
Hmm.
He just cannot go there right now, or he's just whatever is going on. I didn't take the lack of response personally. I just took it as part of the process, right?
Yeah.
I'm not
Yep.
doing it for a response. I'm doing it just to make the person feel loved and supported. And yeah, really not making it about you, because nothing around grief is about anybody else but the person that is experiencing it and the person that has, their relationship to the person that has passed away.
Yeah. Really, really good point. Really,
Yeah.
really good point. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Well, we made it through this one. I would.
I made it through this one, yeah, without tears.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I had everything ready. No,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being so open about this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for holding this conversation with me. It's not an easy conversation to hold.
No, no, and I
Yeah.
hope people that have watched it or will be watching it in the recording do find value in the conversation. Um, and yeah, no, it's good. Um, like us, follow us, share us.
Love
We're still,
us, hug
love us.
us.
Yes. Um, and we are. It looks like we are really moving towards a name change, aren't we?
Yes, we're moving towards we're moving towards a makeover.
A makeover. I love makeovers.
It's just we may take
Okay.
some time,
Yeah.
so bear with us. We're still
Yeah.
us, no matter
It's
the label. It's
yeah.
still us.
Yeah.
It's just us.
It's just us. So it sounds like a TV show called This Is Us. That's
This
fine.
is us. Yeah.
Thanks, Adina. I
Yeah.
appreciate your comment. But
Thank
yeah,
you, dear.
we will see you next week. Everybody have a
Sounds
wonderful
good.
week, a wonder-filled week, and let's stay connected.
And lots of love to anyone who's suffering from a
Absolutely.
loss
Our
right
heart,
now.
my heart goes out.
Our
Reach
hearts
out.
are with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.